Hello and welcome to the Caregiver Chats podcast, designed to help those caring for older adults find balance, support, resources, and encouragement. If you're caring for an aging family member or friend, this podcast is for you. I'm your host, Dr. Lakelyn Eichenberger. It's a long last name, so you can call me Dr. Lakelyn. I'm a gerontologist and caregiver advocate for Home Instead, an Honor company. I know how busy caregivers are, and I'm so grateful that you've taken time to listen. My goal today is to share with you what you can expect on this Caregiver Chats podcast. I'm going to cover three things. First, I'm going to talk about who I am and how I got to be an expert on aging and caregiving. Next, I'm going to talk about what this podcast is all about and what you can expect in the coming episodes. And then third, I'm going to end with 2 quick tips to help you find balance in your caregiving today. So stay tuned and let's get into it. I wanted to start by sharing a little bit about me and how I found my passion in helping older adults and families. And it really started with me watching my own family care for our great-grandma Manhart. And great-grandma had 12 children. She had my grandma was one of those 12 children, and my grandma alone had 6 kids. So if you can imagine, all of those families, there was a small army to care for her. I think she had about 50 grandchildren, 90 some great grandchildren, and everyone really rallied around when she needed help the most. So she was living alone in her apartment just down the street from my grandma when she started to kind of decline in her health. And the doctor said, you have kind of 2 choices. You can move her into a nursing home, or you can move her in with one of the 12 children. Everyone can kind of pitch in and help care for grandma. And nursing home was not an option for our family. So she moved in with my grandma. Everyone kind of created a schedule. They were helping her with the littlest things, making sure she was eating, taking her meds, going for a daily walk. She started with a walker when she first moved in. We started to see improvements in her. It was amazing. I mean, she moved in when she was about 90 years old with my grandma, and she died just shy of her 100th birthday. So it was those little things that really improved her quality of life. Making sure she got up and walking about. She went from using a walker to using a cane. She actually got stronger by having people around. And even though our family was, extensive, again, that small army was there to care for great grandma, we still had gaps in our care. And so it really inspired our family to think about, okay, what do other families do who don't have all of this family around to help care for an aging loved one. And so my parents actually founded Home Instead about 30 years ago. And that really inspired me to kind of pursue this field. I didn't think I'd get into it as soon as I did. I actually discovered my own passion for the field of gerontology my senior year of college. You would have thought, oh, naturally, she'd take a course in gerontology because, she grew up with it. But that wasn't the case. I actually saw a poster on a billboard at school, and it said, have you ever considered a course in gerontology? And I thought, well, it's as good a time as ever. I needed one more class to, be a full-time student. And so I really just fell in love with the content. And I ended up going on to pursue a graduate certificate in gerontology as I was getting my MBA. And then I started working at our local Home Instead franchise here in Omaha and worked one-on-one with families and older adults. And I started to see some of the challenges that these families were faced with in caring for their older adults in their lives. And I also had a deep appreciation for the professional caregivers that were providing the day-to-day care that we provide at Home Instead. It really takes a special person to provide that care. And I had to kind of jump in at times and provide that hands-on care myself. And I probably wasn't the best at it. I learned a lot along the way, but I met some incredible people, incredible older adults, incredible family members. I watched the family dynamics, the challenges, the hard decisions that family caregivers go through on a day-to-day basis. And one of my favorite clients, I'll just share a quick story with you. Her name was Edith. I'm going to change her name for privacy purposes. So I'll call her Edith. She lived in an independent living apartment, and she had 3 children. They were all long-distance caregivers. So one was on the West Coast, one was on the East Coast, and one was about a 2 to 3 hour drive in a neighboring state. And Edith loved where she lived. She did not want to move from her independent living apartment, but she was starting to need some extra help. So the siblings decided to reach out to us at home instead, and I got to be the one that went out, met with the family, and kind of helped them to determine what's going to be the best setup for care to make sure Edith can continue living where she is. And it was a morning assistance kind of shift and then an evening assistance shift. And so because all of the siblings were long distance, I was really helping to coordinate that communication, making sure that everyone was in the loop on her care. And I worked with her for several years, and I saw this family go through some challenging family dynamics. There were disagreements on the type of care that was best for her. There was guilt and resentment. And these are challenges that I see commonly, and you might be kind of self-identifying with these challenges within your own families. And as time went on, Edith unfortunately suffered some mini strokes. And I was the one that was actually there with her in the ER until that long distance family could come to town. I was the one holding her hand and reassuring her that, your family's on the way. And after she got discharged from the hospital, we had to have a family meeting to talk about Edith needing more care because she was now experiencing a little cognitive impairment. Her balance was a little off. And then she was also starting to have a lot of UTIs, urinary tract infections. And so we worked together, the family, the medical team, our care professionals, to develop a strategy to help her drink more water. One of her caregivers, I went over one day and I saw all these Dixie cups lined up on the counter. And I thought to myself, what is this? And Edith said, "We take shots of water all day long." And I just laugh to this day thinking about that and how they just took shots of water all day long. But it was a really creative way to get Edith to drink more water and helped to reduce the number of UTIs she was experiencing. But it was inspiring to see the creativity of her care professionals. And over time, Edith really became like family to me and to those care professionals. We were kind of her local family. And I remember the day that I went to visit Edith for the last time. She had to move to a higher level of care and was on hospice. And it was, of course, a sad moment for me because it's never easy to see someone leave this world. But I knew that the care we provided at least helped to enhance her life up until the end. So I look forward to sharing more stories like this. I'm going to dry my tears over here. Oh my goodness. Just thinking about her just makes my heart full. So I look forward to sharing more of these stories with you and my experiences. But kind of back to my journey and my career path. After I worked at the franchise for about 3 years, I started a new role at our global headquarters, started working also on my master's in gerontology, and eventually got my PhD. And in this role that I get to play now at our global headquarters, I really get to support family caregivers, older adults in a variety of ways. I represent the organization nationally at speaking events and on webinars and at conferences. I even sometimes appear on shows like Dr. Phil or Dr. Oz representing the company, which is super fun. I also get the privilege of being on several boards and advisory committees. One is the National Alliance for Caregiving. I am one of their board members. I'm excited to share more about that organization. It's a great organization. I'm on the Care Advisory Board for Hilarity for Charity, HFC. That was started by Seth Rogen, the actor, and his wife, Lauren Miller Rogen, a wonderful, organization. I'm also really involved in the Alzheimer's Association. And now I'm excited to bring this podcast, Caregiver Chats, to all of you and provide even more resources. So I'm super honored to work in this field. I love what I do. I hope that my passion kind of comes through the speakers wherever you are. And again, I just am delighted to be connecting with you in this way. And I really hope you continue to follow this podcast. So enough about me. Let's talk more about this podcast and what you can expect. So we're going to be dropping new podcasts regularly. So be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app. And sometimes it'll just be me sharing learnings, information, and resources on a specific topic. But I really look forward to also bringing special guests that will share their expertise, their professional or personal caregiving stories. So we're going to shake it up and keep it interesting for you all. And I'm excited, again, to gear these chats to family caregivers. And I acknowledge that there are caregivers across the lifespan, and I value all caregivers. But for this podcast in particular, we're going to stay focused on those caregivers supporting an older adult or an aging adult. And we're going to focus on 5 key areas. So the first is caregiver support, supporting all of you that are doing so much to care for your loved ones or the person that you're caring for. We're also going to focus on aging in place. We know that most people, they want to stay at home, and so that will be a focus. Another will be Alzheimer's and dementia caregiving. And those caregivers hold a special place in my heart for a lot of reasons. I'll tell you more in just a second. And then fourth is care planning. While caregiving, there's so much involved, it helps to have a little bit of a plan in place to make things go a little smoother. And then finally, number 5 is self-care, caregiver self-care. I know that can kind of be a term that maybe gets overused, but I don't think we can talk about it enough. So I want to expand a little bit on each of these topics, and again, why I think they're so important to cover in this podcast series. So first, caregiving support. Caring for an older loved one, it really can feel isolating and lonely, but there are a lot of resources and supports out there. A lot of times caregivers just don't know about them. And it's also time consuming to seek out those resources. So on this podcast, we're really committed to sharing those resources that will help you along your aging journey. And, some of my favorite resources, they're actually on our Home Instead website under our care resource section. And, every podcast will be linking in the show notes to all of the resources that we mentioned. So you can go there anytime I mention a resource and find more information. So that's, all about the caregiver support aspect of this podcast. Next, that aging in place focus. I mentioned most people want to age in place at home, and actually 90% of older adults say they want to age in place at home. And I've never heard anyone say, yes, move me to a nursing home. So, aging in place, aging at home, that's where people really want to be. And I do acknowledge senior living and nursing homes. They do play a really important role in the aging care spectrum. But again, most of the time people want to stay at home. And as a caregiver or care partner, I'm sure that's what you want to do. Help your loved ones stay in their home where they want to be as long as possible. And there's so many things we can do to make the environment more age-friendly. And so, again, throughout this series, I'll be sharing in some episodes on how you can help your loved one age in place. Okay, I mentioned how Alzheimer's and dementia family caregivers, they hold a special place in my heart. I've did my dissertation on this kind of cohort of caregivers. And if you look at the statistics on this group of caregivers, they often experience more stress and strain and burden than other types of caregivers. The experience of caring for a loved one with Alzheimer's and dementia is a little more intense than others. And so we're going to be covering topics specific to this group of caregivers from time to time. And we'll be sharing, of course, some resources specific to that group of caregivers. Okay, so the next category is care planning. And one thing I see far too often is that caregivers and families are making decisions in crisis mode. Mom just fell, dad had a stroke, and overnight you become a caregiver. But the family really hasn't talked about what mom or dad wants. And planning ahead has so many benefits because it can reduce the guilt that a family feels or the stress that they feel in those moments of crisis. They've had the chance to discuss. They know what their loved one wants. So that's why I think focusing on care planning for some of our episodes is going to be really helpful and important. And then that final kind of bucket of topics was that caregiver self-care. We're going to focus on you, the caregiver, which caregivers often they put their own needs on the back burner, so it can kind of sometimes feel selfish to take care of yourself, but it's so, so important. You cannot pour from an empty cup. There's all sorts of analogies that I could make, but you can't pour from an empty cup. And I know that it's often easier said than done, and your time as a caregiver is so precious. You have so many demands. And so it can often be easiest to just, skip over yourself. But there are devastating long-term effects for your health, your physical health, your mental health, your emotional health. We see caregivers have higher numbers of chronic conditions. They're more likely to have depression and anxiety symptoms. So self-care is so important. And it can take so many different forms. And so we're going to be sharing tips on this podcast. And I'd also love to learn from all of you, what you're doing to take care of yourself. How do you prioritize self-care? So those were the 5 focus areas. Again, they are caregiver support, aging in place, Alzheimer's and dementia caregiving, care planning, and caregiver self-care. And so I, again, look forward to bringing you more information on all of these topics. And then finally, I mentioned earlier that I would give you 2 quick tips towards the end of the podcast today to find balance in your own caregiving. So here they are. Tip number 1. Think of at least one thing that you can take off of your caregiving plate. Is there something that you can delegate, or is there something that you can give up or let go of that's going to make it easier for you in your caregiving journey? So maybe it's asking a sibling to take over online bill pay or kind of do some online ordering for you. Or maybe it's asking the neighbor or your child's friend to take your kid to soccer practice, kind of set up a carpool. Maybe it's having somebody, a family member or friend, coming over just for an hour to sit with your loved one, to be with them while you can get out and take care of something important to you. Maybe it's your own doctor's appointment. Maybe it's getting your hair done, going for a walk around the block. There's a lot of different things. And so if you can think of one thing to get off of your plate that's going to lessen your load as a caregiver and give you a little bit more time back, lower that anxiety, hopefully lower that depression just a little bit. And you might even think of a few things, and you could keep kind of those in your back pocket. So the next time somebody says, how can I help you? Is there anything I can do? You have that ask ready, and you can say, oh, I'm so glad you asked. Yes, I would love help with fill in the blank. So that's tip number 1, think of one thing you can get off your plate. Tip number 2 is to take 5 minutes for yourself. Everyone has 5 minutes. And that precious moment, you can take that to do some deep breathing. Maybe you sit in silence with your cup of coffee or your cup of tea and just be still. Maybe you take that 5 minutes to journal your thoughts or feelings. Or maybe you think of, what are 3 things I'm grateful for today? 3 things that actually went right. We can so often think of the negative and focus on that. Or maybe you just do a little gentle stretching. Maybe you pull up a YouTube yoga video, 5 minutes of stretching, really just 5 minutes. We all have it. We all have 5 minutes. And today it might be 5 minutes, but maybe tomorrow or next week it can expand to 10 minutes. And again, you can start to incorporate more self-care into your day-to-day. And I want to take a second to debunk a myth. There's a myth out there that self-care is selfish. And it is not. Self-care is not selfish. It's so important to take care of yourself, take time for yourself. And we're going to be covering that more in upcoming episodes. Join me for episode 1, where I'll address the question, am I really a caregiver? The answer might surprise you, so tune in. While I plan to share a lot of information on this podcast, I also want to hear from you. Please let me know what you're interested in learning about, share your own caregiving tips and your caregiving story. You can email me at caregiverchats@homeinsteadinc.com. That's homeinsteadinc.com. Also, follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Home Instead Inc. That's Home Instead INC. There you will find previews of upcoming episodes, caregiving tips, and more. And you can find all of this information in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening, and please remember to take good care of yourself while you care for others. Caregiver Chats is brought to you by Home Instead. If you're looking for in-home care to support you on your caregiving journey and support your aging loved one, please visit homeinstead.com/caregiverchats to learn more.